For years, I thought I had the perfect life. I worked tirelessly to provide for my wife Sia and our beautiful daughter Harper. My days started early and ended late, but every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed I was building something meaningful, a secure and loving home. Sia was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was sharp, effortlessly charming, and had a presence that could light up any room. People would often compliment us, saying we were the perfect family the couple others aspired to be. But behind closed doors, things were different. The warmth that once defined our relationship had started to fade, replaced by something cold or something calculated. At first it was subtle. Sia would snap at me over small things, roll her eyes when I spoke, or act like my opinions held no weight. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe she was tired from managing the house and caring for Harper. I gave her space, tried harder to please her, thinking if I worked a little more, gave her a little extra, she'd smile at me the way she used to. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I'd come home with her favorite flowers only to be met with indifference. If I offered to help with something around the house, she'd sigh like I was an inconvenience. It felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, careful with every word, every action, just to avoid her sharp looks and icy remarks. Slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't her partner anymore, I was her servant. She'd hand me lists of tasks as if I were her employee rather than her husband. I'd work all day, come home exhausted, and still be expected to cook dinner, clean up, and handle whatever else she deemed my responsibility. Meanwhile, she'd sit on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching TV, barely acknowledging me. Harper would run to me with open arms, and those small moments with her were the only thing keeping me sane. But what hurt the most wasn't the chores or the dismissive tone, it was the way she looked at me. Like I was beneath her, like I was just there, a fixture in her life, not a person she loved or respected. I felt invisible, and yet I kept pushing through, hoping things would change. The worst part was the silence. The long stretches of cold, uncomfortable quiet, where we'd sit in the same room and feel worlds apart. I missed her laugh, her warmth, the way she used to look at me with admiration. But those days felt like a distant memory now, one I couldn't seem to bring back no matter how hard I tried. Deep down, I think I knew something was wrong, something more than just stress or fatigue. But I wasn't ready to face it yet. I wasn't ready to admit that the woman I loved might not love me back anymore. So I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and kept working harder, hoping that one day things would go back to the way they used to be. But life doesn't work like that, and soon, the truth would shatter every illusion I had left. One day, everything unraveled. It started so simply, so innocently, that I almost missed the moment everything changed. I was home alone, cleaning up after Harper had gone to bed. Sia had left her phone on the kitchen counter, face down as if she had nothing to hide. Normally I respected her privacy, I never felt the need to snoop or question her loyalty. But that night something felt off, a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. When her phone buzzed with a notification, I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. What I saw made my stomach drop. It wasn't just casual messages or innocent banter. These texts were explicit, cruel, and dripping with mockery. She was talking to another man, someone she clearly admired and desired. The words she used weren't just affectionate, they were degrading. She spoke about me like I was some pathetic, weak fool, a puppet, as she called me. A man she could control and manipulate without consequence. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling as I scrolled through message after message, each one a dagger straight to my heart. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was enjoying it, thriving in it. Worse still, she had plans that didn't involve love, partnership, or even basic respect. She was plotting to keep me tied down, working tirelessly to provide for her, while she lived out her fantasy life with someone else. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Every dismissive glance, every cold remark, every time she had treated me like I was beneath her, it all made sense now. I wasn't her husband. In her eyes, I was a resource, a tool she could use to fund her comfort while she entertained herself elsewhere. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone still in hand, trying to process what I had just discovered. A wave of emotions crashed over me: rage, humiliation, heartbreak. But beneath all of that was something else: clarity. For the first time in years, I could see things for what they truly were. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't imagining the distance between us. It was real. and it was deliberate. When Saya came home that night, I couldn't look at her the same way. She greeted me with a fake smile, her phone already clutched tightly in her hand. Did she know I had seen the messages? Did she suspect anything? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing: I couldn't confront her yet. I wasn't ready. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how I was going to handle this mess without letting her destroy me completely. The house suddenly felt suffocating, every shared space tainted with her betrayal. I stayed silent, but inside, something in me was shifting. The man who had quietly endured years of emotional abuse was waking up, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to power. She thought she had me trapped, but she had underestimated me, and she was about to learn just how wrong she was. That betrayal lit a fire in me. For days I walked around in a fog, carrying the weight of what I'd discovered like an anchor tied to my chest. Every glance Sia threw my way felt like an insult. Every word she spoke dripped with condescension. But instead of breaking me further, her behavior fueled something deep within me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I realized I had spent so long bending over backward to please her, to keep our marriage afloat, that I had completely lost myself in the process. I was done being her puppet. At first, I didn't know where to start. How do you rebuild yourself after years of being torn down bit by bit? The answer was surprisingly simple, one step at a time. I started small, early morning runs before anyone else woke up, pushing my body to exhaustion until the pain in my muscles matched the ache in my chest. I dusted off the weights in the garage, turning that cold, cluttered space into my sanctuary. Every rep, every drop of sweat felt like I was chipping away at the version of myself Saya had created, the weak, obedient version she thought she could control. I also began reconnecting with people I'd pushed away over the years. Old friends, family members, people who once cared about me before I let myself become isolated under Saya's thumb. Conversations that started awkwardly soon turned into reminders of who I used to be, a man with ambition, humor, and self-respect. These connections felt like lifelines, pulling me back to the surface after being submerged for so long. Sia, of course, barely noticed the change at first. She was too caught up in her own world to realize that I wasn't the same man quietly catering to her every whim. She still barked orders, rolled her eyes, and acted like my efforts to better myself were inconveniences to her carefully crafted dynamic. But I didn't react anymore. Her words no longer had the power to break me because I had started to believe in myself again. More than anything, I focused on Harper. My daughter became my anchor, my reason for staying strong. Every moment I spent with her reminded me of what truly mattered. I didn't want her growing up thinking this was what love looked like: cold, transactional, and filled with manipulation. I wanted to set an example, to show her that strength doesn't come from dominating others, but from standing tall, even when the world tries to pull you down. The more I changed, the more Saya seemed to sense it. There were moments when her eyes lingered on me a little longer, almost like she was realizing she was losing control. But it was too late. The cracks in our marriage had become unfixable chasms, and for once, I wasn't trying to build a bridge to meet her halfway. I was walking away from the wreckage, one determined step at a time. The day finally came when I confronted her. I had spent weeks preparing myself, gathering evidence and planning every word I would say. I wasn't going to let anger cloud my judgment, or let her manipulate me into second-guessing myself. I needed to be calm, controlled, and unshakable. The moment felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how this would all unfold. Sia was lounging on the couch when I approached her, her phone glued to her hand as usual. She barely looked up when I said her name, her expression bored, almost annoyed that I had dared to interrupt whatever trivial thing she was doing. But this time I wasn't backing down. I placed my phone on the table, evidence open and ready, the screenshots of her messages, the cruel words she had written about me, the plan she had laid out with her affair partner. For a moment there was silence. Her face froze as her eyes scanned the screen. Then slowly she looked up at me, and instead of guilt or regret, she smirked. That smirk, it was like a punch to the gut. She didn't deny it, didn't even try to explain herself. Instead, she laughed, her voice sharp and hollow, and called me weak, pathetic, and gullible. She told me I could never leave her, that I'd never have the strength to actually follow through with any threat. But what she didn't realize was that I had already made up my mind. Her words no longer had power over me. I stayed calm, my voice steady as I told her exactly what was going to happen next. I was filing for divorce, and I was fighting for full custody of Harper. I made it clear that I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore. She could sneer, she could mock me, but I was done being her doormat. That's when the facade cracked. The smug confidence slipped from her face, and for the first time I saw panic in her eyes. She started backtracking, her tone shifting from arrogant to desperate. She begged, pleaded, and cried, suddenly acting as if she was the victim. But it was too late. I had spent years being gaslit, manipulated, and belittled. I wasn't falling for her act this time. Harper was upstairs, blissfully unaware of the chaos unraveling below. My priority was her safety, her well-being, and her future. I wasn't going to let Sia's toxicity poison our daughter's life the way it had poisoned mine. That night, I slept on the couch, not because I was weak, but because I refused to share a space with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. The next morning, I began taking the steps to free myself from her grip once and for all. The confrontation wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the final chapter of this nightmare. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, a clarity that told me I was on the right path. Sia's reign over me was over, and I was never going to let her have that power again. The divorce wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The weeks that followed were some of the most exhausting and emotionally draining of my life. Sia fought tooth and nail, using every manipulative trick she had left in her arsenal. She played the victim in court, painting herself as the misunderstood wife and me as the cold, unfeeling husband. She tried to weaponize every interaction we'd ever had, twisting my words and actions to fit her narrative. But I was prepared. I had the evidence, the messages, and most importantly, the truth on my side. Harper became my guiding light through it all. Every time I felt like I was breaking under the pressure, every time Sia's tactics started to wear me down, I'd look at my daughter's face and remind myself who I was fighting for. Harper deserved a stable home, one free from manipulation, tension, and emotional games. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for her future. The day the final verdict was handed down felt like I could finally breathe again. I was granted full custody of Harper, and Sia was left with only limited visitation rights. Walking out of that courtroom, holding Harper's small hand in mine, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I had carried for far too long. Adjusting to life as a single dad wasn't without its struggles. There were sleepless nights, financial worries, and moments when I felt completely overwhelmed. But despite the challenges, there was peace in our home, a peace I hadn't felt in years. The air felt lighter, the silence felt comforting instead of suffocating, and Harper started to smile more. I focused on building a new life for us. I poured my energy into my work, into being a better father, and into continuing the self-growth I had started during those months of preparation. I discovered passions I had long forgotten and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. Slowly, I felt myself coming back to life, not just existing, but truly living. As for Sia, she seemed to disappear into her own chaos. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about her life falling apart, relationships failing, financial troubles piling up, but I didn't care anymore. She was no longer my concern, and I refused to let her existence cast a shadow over the life I was building. Looking back, I realized that her betrayal, as painful as it was, had been the wake-up call I desperately needed. It forced me to confront the man I had become, to reclaim my self-respect, and to prioritize what truly mattered. Harper and I created a home filled with laughter, warmth, and security. She was my constant reminder of why I had fought so hard, and every day I felt grateful to have her by my side. I had walked through the fire, endured the worst kind of heartbreak, and emerged stronger. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter. One where I was no longer someone's puppet, no longer trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. I was free, and for the first time in years I felt truly alive.